The first group whom she saw punished were sinful and duplicitous preachers. This group included all those who failed in their duty to correct the wrongdoings of others, motivated either by fear or by hopes of gaining favor or reward. The souls of such sinful and negligent preachers were sent into a furnace filled with hideous adders and vipers.
We're going to have Father Robert Nixon on from TAN Publishing. He's got a new book out. We've had him on before, you might remember. But we're going to be talking about the visions of Saint Francesca of Romana of Rome. We're going to be talking about hell, purgatory, and heaven. Pretty vivid descriptions from her visions.
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
There is a new book out by TAN, praise be to God. This is called The Visions of St. Francis of Rome, Hell, Purgatory, and Heaven Revealed. TANbooks.com is their website. And Father Nixon, who is the translator of this, Father Robert Nixon, joins us all the way from sunny Australia. Good morning to you, Father Nixon.
Good morning, Joe. It's fantastic to be with you and have the opportunity of sharing this wonderful new work with all your listeners.
Let's talk about St. Francis of Rome. Let's get to know her first.
Well, she was born into a wealthy and noble Roman family, and she felt a very great devotion from an early age and felt called to give herself entirely to the love of Jesus. However, her parents had different plans for her. She was married, and this was quite a usual thing back at this stage in history. People seldom chose their own spouse or even whether they got married or not. So she was married to this man, but despite being married and responsible for a household, she continued to live a very devout life. She would pray the divine office. She would practice the fasting, the vigils, and everything which went with the usual life of being a nun, despite the fact that she was married. And in the course of time, her husband passed away, and she took the opportunity of establishing a convent. And this was a convent according to the rule of Saint Benedict, and I'm, of course, a Benedictine monk, so she's an important saint for us. She became what is known as a Benedictine oblate. Now, Benedictine oblates are people who are not professed monks or nuns, and she couldn't be that because of her family, of her marital status, the fact that she had children and so forth. But they still try to follow the rule of Saint Benedict. And she founded this monastery called the Torre del Specchio, or the Tower of Mirrors. And it attracted a great many of the noble women of Rome who wanted to join her in this life of prayer. And during her life, she experienced a great many miracles. She was able to see her guardian angel, which is a rare gift. She, in fact, is the patron saint of not only Benedictine oblates, but also of automobile drivers. And the reason she is the patron of that particular thing is because, according to a story, a legend, that whenever she was riding her wagon through the streets of Rome in the darkness, an angel would go before her to illuminate the way.
Wow.
Anyway, she experienced a lot of visions, and she had a confessor or spiritual director, a canon, Giovanni Matteotti, and he carefully wrote down everything which she related to him. And this particular set of visions which took her on a grand tour of hell, purgatory, and heaven, they all occurred on a single day when she was confined to her sickbed. And she had this experience, which, you know, when you read it, it seems like it would take ages and ages, but it was all within the space of a day. And during this great tour, this spiritual tour of the afterlife, of the world beyond this one, she was accompanied by the Archangel Raphael, who explained things to her as she was going along and answered all of her questions. So it is truly a remarkable, to think this is not just a work of fiction or imagination. This is a revelation received by one of the greatest saints and mystics of the Church. And until now, it has not been translated into English. So I was delighted to have the opportunity of making this exciting and somewhat harrowing work available to readers for the very first time.
So what was the reception at the time when she was having these visions and relating them to her spiritual director? Do we have any sense of that?
Yeah, well, we know that her spiritual director was a very diligent scribe. He wrote down these visions. He wrote down a whole set of other visions she had as well after receiving the Blessed Sacrament. There was no question at the time, because it often happens when people have visions. It's often thought, oh, well, this might be the effect of illness, or this might be the effect of, some kind of demonic entity or something. But no, with Saint Francis of Rome, they were well received because they knew that she was a sound, a well-balanced, healthy individual. And although she was sick on this particular day, there was no question of anything, apart from these being genuine revelations, and they were highly esteemed. She was actually one of the saints who was canonized quite quickly. The veneration of her existed very soon after her death, which is, in my opinion, a very high commendation of the trustworthiness of these visions.
Now, Dante's Divine Comedy comes to us in the 14th century, early 14th century, first half. She's receiving these visions later. Would she have read that? Would she have been familiar with Dante's Inferno?
I believe that she would have been, because that, of course, was a great work of Italian literature, and she was a literate and educated woman. I believe that, in a way, it perhaps could have, set her thinking in this mind, set her concentration, but that doesn't negate the fact that it is a genuine revelation. Because with the case of private revelations, they're always mediated through a person's own particular cultural perspective. And we find when she's talking, she talks, of course, about a lot of medieval sins, a lot of medieval torments and so forth. And we can still understand what they are. But if a contemporary person was having a vision of hell, they would probably see a bunch of contemporary things in it. I'm not saying that it would be completely different,
sure,
but it's mediated through her own culture. Yeah.
But I mean, immediately thought when you're reading your work, your translated work here, is the comparison in the mind to Dante's Inferno or Dante, the Divine Comedy. There's an immediate comparison that goes on in the mind, which is what made me think about it. In her visions, everything is divided up into threes, right? Hell is divided into three, purgatory, etc. Whereas in the Inferno, hell is like 9 layers. So maybe can you speak to that? Tell us about that division of 3.
Yeah. So the division of 3, of course, is extremely important. It's kind of Trinitarian, and even within this threefold division, there are then multiple divisions, but these are often 3. Well, she talks about hell when she goes into it, and she sees firstly this horrific gate with a terrifying inscription written seemingly in blood. She talks about then the different layers of hell, the 3 levels. The saint saw that they were cast into the mouth of the dragon. And then they go into these different levels. So the lower levels are the very worst, and then the medium level, and finally the top level. And even with limbo, there are multiple levels. So there's the level for the children who die unbaptized, and then level for people who die in different situations and end up in limbo. So, yeah.
There was 2 interesting characters in the 3 levels of hell in your book. One was this dragon that was in all 3 levels, but Lucifer, because when I read the dragon, I thought, oh, that's got to be Satan. But Satan is a different character who is also in all 3 levels. Who is the dragon then, if it's not Lucifer? And then why would they be in all 3 levels?
So this great dragon is kind of it's there. It's not exactly clear what it is, because this was her vision. But in my opinion, this dragon is kind of like the beast of the apocalypse, who, of course, if you read carefully, is not actually the devil, but he's like a kind of independent beast who is a representation, I believe, of evil. He kind of works for Satan. Now, the body of Satan is described in this as extending from the very top layer of hell right down to the bottom. And it's kind of affixed to this great wooden staff. But she says it has no resemblance to a cross somehow, because the form of a cross is forbidden. she has one chapter on the particular names and activities of the four principal demons of hell. So she talks firstly about Lucifer or Satan, and then he is ranked with the fallen seraphim, the fallen cherubim. And then the other ones, Asmodeus, Mammon, Beelzebul, and they all have their own particular areas of interest. So Lucifer is responsible for those guilty of pride. He says, this fallen angel, known as the bearer of light and the morning star, is the supreme patron and the ultimate victim of pride.
There was a mention of Christians in particular in hell because they didn't go to confession.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
There is. So there's a talk about, people who die with unrepentant sin. And there's a special section on apostates, which means people who were Christians, but basically end up denying the faith. And, this is such a powerful reminder of the importance of repenting while we still have the chance. And these punishments which she describes, some of them are particularly terrifying. She goes through to describe pretty much every class of sin you can imagine, every kind of vice, and the punishment which corresponds for it. And one of the things which St. Francis mentions at one stage is that she actually sees someone who she recognized from his living life, someone who had been a respected priest or had seemed to be a respected priest, but then, had been guilty of crimes behind the scene. Now, I'll just share with you a little bit about some of the punishments she describes for corrupt clergy and priests. The first group whom she saw punished were sinful and duplicitous preachers. This group included all those who failed in their duty to correct the wrongdoings of others, motivated either by fear or by hopes of gaining favor or reward. I think that's pretty relevant these days. There were also present there teachers who had mixed human falsehoods with the divine word of truth, and thus led their hearers into error. The souls of such sinful and negligent preachers were sent into a furnace filled with opaque, contorted, and swirling shadows of almost palpable density. In addition to this suffocating and oppressive obscurity, there were a multitude of hideous adders and vipers, which struck out relentlessly with envenomed fangs and darting forked tongue.
Wow.
There were also demons there in the form of huge black hounds. These wolf-like phantasmagoric creatures would squat down and in a canine manner emit foul-smelling, viscous dung into the mouths of those preachers who had lacked the courage to correct the faults of others as their duty demanded. Pretty harrowing stuff, I have to say. And
yeah. That would give me pause. I mean, you're a priest. How does that make you feel as a priest, knowing that if you fail to do your duty, this is your fate?
It's a kind of reminder, that these sins, these failures can creep in quite readily. And, it's not always in a big way that people suddenly wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a slack priest. But little by little, they start to, think, I don't want to offend these people, or I need to keep on the good side of whoever. And after a while, it actually takes away their courage, their truth. And then they become, as St. James says, friends of the world. And anyone who is a friend of the world is an enemy of God. So I think from time to time, priests need to have a good look at themselves. And, I say this, ask yourself, when was the last time I offended someone? And if the answer is, I can't remember that when I offended someone, then it means you're probably not proclaiming the truth strongly enough.
Yeah. I was fascinated by the fact that even in Purgatory, in her visions, there were demons there to remind those in Purgatory who are, let's just be reminded, have a hope for eternity. They are being purged and purified and prepared for the beatific vision. But still there was a demon there on their left, if I'm not mistaken, to remind them of what they have done wrong. Is that the case?
So she talks about purgatory. She talks about how the fires of purgatory, and again, it's in 3 levels. They're of a different nature to the fires of hell, because these flames, whereas the fires of hell are black and lightless, whereas the flames of purgatory glow with a vivid red and give forth radiant light. the light of these purifying and cleansing fires illuminates the soul, which are here with divine grace. And then she talks about the companions of each soul. Each soul has got two companions. On its left, it's got this demon who is, and now she mentions that it's a demon, but it's actually working for God. You know, it's doing God's service by reminding the souls of its guilt and of the terrible things it's done and of their seriousness. But on the right side, she says she sees an angel, an entity of indescribable beauty and magnificence, and bathed in the splendid glow of ethereal refulgence. This angel was, in fact, the very same spiritual entity who had been appointed by God to serve as the guardian angel of the soul, and who now comforted it and protected it. And she observes that it encourages the soul also by telling it every time someone says a prayer for it or gives alms on its behalf. So I think this is a wonderful testimony of the efficacy of praying for the faithful departed.
And what does she say about heaven? Again, 3 levels?
Yeah, again, and there is a very beautiful scene which she describes in which the souls in purgatory are taken up into heaven. So her attention was drawn to the souls which were taken from purgatory and brought to heaven. They were the ones who had completed their assigned term of penance, repentance, and purification. The glorious Queen of Heaven would descend on them on a cloud of golden light. She was robed in a garment of azure blue, which glimmered like sapphire, and upon her head she wore the starred crown of celestial majesty. Her beauty was such that Francis could find no words to describe it. And then she takes the soul from purgatory and assigns it to whichever of the ranks of heaven it has merited. But she talks about the glorious rejoicing of all the blessed and all the angels as each soul enters into the kingdom of heaven. She describes also wonderfully the melodiousness of the angels singing and of the souls of the blessed singing. So it's really quite an amazing chapter. She says it's her shortest chapter because everything in heaven exceeds words, but still, it's very beautiful.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.